justice.
Greetings, ladies and gentlethems. Welcome to this very special presentation of your away team. My name is Lieutenant Commander Kennedy Allen, and as always, I am joined by my esteemed colleague,
Lieutenant Commander Tony Ray.
And that's right, folks. We are coming to your time stream right now, live for the first time in years, I would say. I think that's pretty an accurate way to say this. For those of you who are unfamiliar, Your Away Team is an exploration into the Cosmic African Diaspora that exists all throughout what you know as Star Trek, what we know as our day job. We serve as PAOs, or as you would call them, public affairs officers for Lieutenant Commanders S'Triton and Lieutenant Commanders Talij, the foremost temporal investigators, dare we say, Starfleet's finest in terms of the temporal department. We are so very pleased, proud, and privileged to be part of the first ever IDIC Podcast Festival presented by the good folks over at Women at Warp. And we would just love an opportunity to sit here and talk about your history, if that's okay, from a couple of human beings to another. How are you feeling today, Commander Ray?
So I had a temporal accident, and because there's no one to wave a dermal regenerator over my eye, I have to use this contraption for the time being. But other than that, I am quite well. I'm very, very excited to dive into this because, you know, most of the time we spend all of our conversations in the Jeffries tubes, and there's so many different files that we get to talk about to each other, but now we get to talk to other people about it because, you know, authorized.
Right. A lot of what we deal with is quite classified. Parts of the Temporal Prime Directive prevent us from really divulging really anything about your future, but we can talk about the past. And today we have been tasked by our superior officers to discuss temporal blackness. We're going to take a deep dive and explore how time travel pertains to people of the Cosmic African Diaspora. Now, a bulk of this conversation will focus on Earth and Earth's history, which is why they assigned us. As strong and as strict as our COs can be, they were definitely on the right path by making sure they let the humans talk about the human things. So as I looked over their notes and we compiled some of our own, I was able to really dig deep into some of these things, but also pay attention to some of the other members of the Cosmic African Diaspora as well. So what we've done for you today, as I review my notes here, is compile a list of examples of when time travel occurred, when there was infractions, as we like to call them, and how they pertain to the overall storytelling of the episode, or as we call the data stream. Our objective today is to closely examine how members of the Cosmic African Diaspora navigate and survive traveling through what we call temporal interruptive manipulation events, or what you call time. It's really something that we kind of geek out about, and we're very pleased, as Commander Ray mentioned, to be able to have this conversation with you today, because it's, as Dr. Gabrielle Burnham said best, time travel is not for the faint of heart.
Oh, we got it!
Did we say it at the same time? I mean, that's kind of what temporal officers do. Got excited for a second. They don't let us out much. Continue, Tony, please.
All right, so we're going to start with Dr. Gabrielle Burnham. Now, for many you know, she would be seen on the temporal program Discovery. And for the information we compiled from her file, she was an amazing scientist for her time. She developed a time travel suit, like Red Angel technology. She kept logs while adrift in time. Who did she join, Kennedy?
The Kawat Milats. So not only did Dr. Gabrielle Burnham intentionally get in this suit to try and preserve time, she initially got in to go back, I think, an hour to prevent her family from being attacked by the Klingons, and kind of missed the mark and ended up being flung into the time-space continuum and spent a good chunk of her life trying to get back not only to her family, but also to the time stream that she belonged in. And in doing so, as you said, collected data. The first step of being a good scientist, whether you're a temporal scientist or otherwise, is keeping track of what you're doing. We cannot stress enough how important it is, whether it's a shared, what do they call them here? Google Docs? Or whether you're up.
Yeah. It keeps everything in line, you know, which particles where, who's supposed to do what. But something that's really important about Dr. Burnham is the fact that did she have time to like stop and emotionally unpack what she was going through? Did she have time to feel?
And that's important, right? One of the things that we forget to consider as we look over the logs that take place during these time frames is that many of them concern human beings, and human beings are emotional people, and some of them do a good job of compartmentalizing those feelings, but some of us don't. And I think that can be called into question with Dr. Burnham's attempts to kind of smolder that. I think she probably went through her own journey, which is why she fell in so well with the Coatmi lot.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. We can move on then. And it's important because
we got a lot.
We do have a lot to cover, because as much as I want to linger on Dr. Burnham and that beautiful moment when she was able to touch base with Michael in the 32nd century and tell her that for the first time, you know where to find me, is monumental in and of itself. But specifically, when you take under consideration Michael's journey in finding herself and developing a sense of self alongside having multiple parental figures, and, you know, everything else that Michael has been through. So I just wanted to highlight Dr. Burnham and ensure that her contributions to temporal exploration were noted today. Now we can get to the good part. So we're skipping the 2260s altogether. Skipping them. I know a lot of you who are watching us today are like, what? How are you leaving out the Enterprise A, B, C, and bloody D? We're not leaving out Enterprise D, but we are leaving out the original series, as some of you call it, TOS, those old scientists, as I like to refer to them as, because quite frankly, as many temporal infractions as Kirk had, and believe us, there's a lot. He never brought any black people with him.
Why? Why would you say his name? Like, why?
Part of the reason why we have a temporal prime directive is because of James T. Kirk. Like, let's be real about it. I really, I guess would be remiss if we didn't acknowledge the fact that his multiple infractions are notable in terms of the ship's logs, but whoo boy, the paperwork. Yeah, your face says it completely. Are you remembering that time in the academy where we had to...
Too many messes, okay? There are way too many messes that we have to clean up. And it's that simple. Kirk, Captain Admiral Kirk, I would really appreciate it if you stopped doing the thing.
Yeah, you can say this and put it out in the ether, because time, exists in ripples, and eventually on some time stream, he will hear some temporal officers from his future tell him to lay down. Just stop it, right? And on top of all that, he didn't bring any black people from his crew onto those missions with him, which I, as a fan of the work of Commander Uhura, I'm okay with that. I would have rather her not get caught up in that mess and also, risk her life. We're okay, right?
Okay, that's fair.
We could say that we're Okay, cool. So we're going to skip on to the 24th century, as you all call it, the next generation, because there have been some pretty interesting incursions there. Some of them were a little bit more destructive than others, and some of them were incredibly constructive on the flip side of that. And speaking of constructive, interruptive, manipulative events particularly, I'm thinking of Time's Arrow first. Now, Time's Arrow is a heavy episode. There are loads of things to critique, loads and loads of things to pick apart. Mark Twain comes to mind, that jerk. What a jerk! What a jerk! Why are you like this? Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just agreeing with you. Mark Twain, the worst. The absolute
worst.
Made our job so much harder.
Yeah, that was a mess to clean up, because he kept trying to like drop hints with things later on in life, like after the incursion happened, and we had to remind, don't do that. Don't do that. Don't do that. Thanks. Or we're going to take away your subspace privileges. I will do it. I will. He did eventually get over himself and come around to see the error of his ways. But it did cause the crew, the senior officers of the Enterprise, great emotional disdain until he got himself together. And I'm speaking directly about the fact, the time loop, the causality loop of Data having to go back in time to find his own head and then leave his head and then somehow send a message forward. It's complicated. It's one of those things. It's like a predestination paradox, where had Data not gone back, we might not have ever had the adventures of the Enterprise D and her crew. But moreover than needing to go back to solve the Data conundrum, we wanted to focus a little bit on Gainen, because Gainen, as an Elarian, has a sensitive perception to temporal events just as a default. So we're always going to be able to rely on her clarity when it comes to temporal incursions. And we're very, very grateful for that. She does a very good job of minding her business, which is one of our staples. If you've ever listened to our show, we always say to mind our business. But the question, what was she doing in the 1800s? Tony, you had theories on this.
Oh, the theory was that she was already just living there during the 1800s. So when they discovered Gainen, she was holding a salon of intellectual minds, sitting there and talking. And then when Data had mentioned a starship, her first question was, what, Kennedy?
Are you from a clipper? She thought he meant a ship, like a boat, until he clarified a starship. Speaking of time infractions, it looks as though Tony might be caught in a loop there. He'll get back to us in just a moment. We deal with these things all the time. Looking like a Starfleet Nick Fury. I said it. That's fine. I'll keep it pushing, Tony. You'll catch up when we catch up. This is what happens when you deal in time travel. You deal in lags in time like this. It's fine. So she was holding court, essentially, after publishing a book or a tome of some sort, and Data, finding out that she was existing in that time period, runs to see her, runs to connect, tries to collaborate with her, not realizing that this is, in fact, past Gainen, and she has no recollection of their relationship or her existence on the Enterprise or any of that. And I wanted to highlight this elegant, high society Black woman existing in the late 1800s in America, which we all know, if you know your history at all, is definitely a rough patch of time for folks in marginalized communities. And to see Gainen hold court in such a way, and thriving, living her best Elarian life, to not only see that, but also see how impactful her presence was to the people around her, was important as well. This wasn't somebody who was hiding. You know, she wasn't quantum leaping her way through the past. She was existing in it. She was interacting with those people. And to see her poised in that way, in that time specifically, is incredibly impactful. Not only to people who were able to view that time stream at the time it was airing, but as temporal officers who look back on Earth's events and to see which of the members of the Cosmic African Diaspora make it. So seeing Gainen was important. And instantly I wondered if she was going to experience racism in a way that we have been led to believe existed during the time. And fortunately, she was not. But it was somebody else in that crew that experienced racism. Mm-hmm. Isn't that right, Tony?
Yes, Lieutenant Commander Laforge. At the time, he was seen by one of the officers in the town with what was known as a gentleman's cane. And because he was black in there, he was like, you can't own this. There's no way. But the man is in a finely pressed suit, a tailored suit, like bespoke, and he can't have a cane. And they did that scene so well that that LeVar Burton took that information, like he's like, you can do this scene, but you don't get my reaction on camera. And so the scene was over his shoulder, correct?
Right, correct. So we don't actually see Geordi experience racism to his face, thankfully, because I think many of us would have been jarred by that. But we did see that it occurred nonetheless. And to see that occur, not only just in general, to see a character or to see an officer deal with racism in another time and place, but for that racism to come from law enforcement is particularly jarring at that time, in your time. And unfortunately, you know what, I'm not even going to get into the future because we're not supposed to talk about that. We're not supposed to talk. Right. And I think it's important to note that it was Commander Riker that stepped in, and intervened and neutralized the threat so that they can continue with their mission. But I feel as though it probably got a little too far, and it was jarring also because, you know, as much as technology prevented Geordi's condition from being a true disability during the 1800s, being blind is definitely a disability. So he was in a whole disadvantage during that time frame. And I was pleased to review those logs and not see too much overt racism towards Commander Laforge. But at the same time, it happened. And I'm glad that part was, you know, not omitted from the log for the sake of integrity.
I mean, a good amount of temporal logs, let's say the other word. We've been here too long. A good amount of them do really well with making sure that the members of the crew who happen to be of the diaspora are prepared for whatever they're walking into, no matter how asinine it is. And I always love their calm and cool and collectiveness when we know that somebody would just open a can of,
kick butt. Boom, boom. It's the double fist punch. You know, Starfleet issue double fist punch. But you're right. Right. And I also want to highlight Gainen's ability to keep her wits about her, not only in the past when things got a little weird, you know, she's meeting all these random people from the future and all of their contraptions and gadgets and gizmos aplenty, but also present Gainen, right? 24th century Gainen, who had the foresight, the wherewithal not to mention to Picard exactly how their friendship developed. So when you think about the fact that this was, which season was this in? This might have been 5th or 6th season, I would say, somewhere in that ballpark. We went that long of her existing on that ship, never giving a hint as to why her and Picard are as close as they are. And it really can force you to think about the incursion of that, right? Here's young Gainen in the 1800s being injured, helping these randos, and then being comforted and caressed and held and gently treasured and cherished by this random bald white man. That spoke to her with reverence.
Woo!
Tell me wrong.
That never not makes me laugh, because it's true. But it's true. It's that moment where she says, "You have to go back, otherwise we will have never met." And he's like, "Oh, all right, I'm out."
Well, she didn't say that. She didn't let him know that if he didn't go back, they would never meet. She just said, "You have to go." And when he got there and saw her, was like, "Oh, girl, we friends." And I can only imagine what she as a Black woman would have perceived at that moment. This rando older white dude coming up to her like, "Girl, we besties." And she's like, "I don't know you, sir." To then realize that this man only had her best intentions in heart, stayed behind with her when his crew went back to their proper timeline to ensure her safety. So that interaction was impactful, not only for the time-space continuum, as we learned later on, but also as far as relationships between Gainen and Jean-Luc Picard. Right, exactly. So that's the biggest one in the biggest time travel, or rather the temporal interruptive manipulation event in Next Generation. So I want to move on to Deep Space Nine because there are simply more. There are more instances of time travel that involve members of the Cosmic African Diaspora. Of course, that might be a default because there are more Black people on Deep Space Nine.
Why are they in Deep Space though?
Oh, see, you've been in the 21st century too long. But that's a good point. They did put the only... You're not wrong. They did station Sisko directly after experiencing trauma, okay, losing his wife, having to relocate his young son to this raggedy behind, janky behind, crusty, dusty, beat up Cardassian station in the middle of nowhere. And he's just supposed to like be okay with that. So you literally put my man in the back of the bus. Okay, cool. I just
and make sure he had to keep the bus running.
I'm sorry, repeat that.
And made sure he had to keep the bus running.
Yeah. Sorry, you don't get time off to mourn your wife. Like, we need you to get to work. We're not going to promote you for 3 years, but you know, we're going to expect you to have all the responsibility of a full-blown captain. I'm getting beside myself. Don't let me get in my Sisko bag because I will go in. Speaking of a Sisko bag, the first episode that we... I know, right? We're about to get into that anyhow. I wanted to pull up past tense first and foremost. Past tense has been mentioned quite frequently, actually, presently during the IDIC Podcast Festival in a number of different ways, in a number of different contexts. But speaking specifically in terms of time travel, this is an incursion, right? Commander Sisko at that point, Dr. Bashir, and Lieutenant Dax had all gone back in time accidentally. It was definitely a rift that they should not have slipped through, and yet here they are in the, I think, late 21st century. We're 3 ways. Presently in 2021, we are 3 years away. Yeah, we are 3 years away from the Bell riots. So they came back to just about now-ish to find the country in a state of social, political, economical, duress, decline, fall, however you'd like to, explain that.
Last year.
Right. Where here we are in another situation where the very sake of a society is contingent upon how this society handles the unceremonious murder of a Black man, and how that death has influenced a movement. Presently, and in the not so distant past, you all have experienced this quite a deal from what we've been able to monitor, because we can't really interrupt or give you heads up. 2020 was a doozy, and we're sorry we couldn't help you. Yeah, we're sorry we couldn't give you a heads up. It's one of those things. We kind of have to let you make your own mistakes, and then we can talk about them afterwards. And past tense was a mistake that unfortunately couldn't have been avoided, right? In fact, them landing at that time period, I think they interrupted the natural flow of things, and Gabrielle Bell was killed prematurely and without coverage. So Sisko and Bashir then had to pretty much rally the troops to get that revolution off the ground, to get that movement started. And I think it's important because here are two Black men in the past. A lot of folks don't like to consider Bashir a Black person, but if we're breaking a wall for a moment, Sadiq El Fadil is half Sudanese, and Sudan is in Africa. So
there you go.
So here's two people of color. Let's say, if we want to, not make that argument, here's two marginalized people going back into a very tumultuous time, and being unable to gain access to basic human needs, food, water, shelter. All of those things were scarce for everyone. Yeah. And the only person that was able to exist in any type of quote unquote civilization was Dax. Can we talk about the fact that a white presenting woman was able to avoid dealing with, state sanctioned poverty? We could get into that, but I think it's best to focus on the fact that it was the death of Gabrielle Bell. It was Sisko's knowledge of humanity's past, to know the importance of Gabrielle Bell, that made that infraction so impactful. And Tony, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this instance as well.
You pretty much covered all of them. Like there isn't much left to say, because we often talk about how we, knowing so much about the past, never really would want to travel to the past, because think about everything that you have currently. You won't have that if you go to the past. And then the prosperity that has been made. We move forward and continue to move forward. We understand what has happened to get us to where we are, and that is absolutely important and absolutely necessary in order to move forward. And so, just watching Captain Sisko and Bashir go down to make sure that is very, very admirable.
Yeah, I would agree for sure. Moving beyond past tense, because I'm sure we could get into, and to be honest, doing the paperwork on the Gabrielle Bell riots, now that Sisko was the reason that they happened, was a little bit of a mess. We had to defer to our superiors on how to file that correctly, because it needed to happen, and if it didn't happen,
want to tell a Klingon that someone messed up the timeline? Do you want to tell her? I don't ever.
It's not fun.
Woman always
usually
a good day to die.
I mean, you got to at least respect her consistency. But, to your point, S'Triton made a really good argument that it was one of those, again, predestination things. If Sisko hadn't gone back and perpetrated as Gabrielle Bell, would the movement have succeeded? Would ultimately the events that started the Third World War had happened, and so on and so forth? So dealing with temporal incursions is always messy business, and it's a little difficult to it's messy. You need detail-oriented individuals to pay attention to the details. Go ahead.
Some of their greed would have just made it happen anyway.
Yeah. And really, when you think about it, I don't think he really had much of a choice, right? There was no way to not interfere, because not interfering would mean that history would not unfold the way it needed to in order for him and his crew and his family to exist. So it's definitely one of those causality loop things that ends up on our desks way more frequently than we care to admit.
You have to start a change in order to move things forward.
Exactly. Speaking of moving forward, there is another instance of being unable to move forward, and we see that in the critically acclaimed episode, The Visitor, which involves, this one, the one where everybody's eyeballs start sweating,
just a little bit.
Yeah, it was definitely something where Jake essentially became a temporal physicist to be able to return his father to the correct timeline after an accident in the warp core. It was a little unclear how a warp core accident resulted in... Oh, he was caught up in subspace. That's what it was. Sisko got caught in a subspace rift and kept snapping back and forth through time using Jake as the anchor. And in his quest to reunite himself with his father, in his quest to bring his dad back to the proper timeline, Jake ended up wasting his... He didn't waste his life, but he dedicated his life to something that was against his nature. Jake was a writer. Jake was a journalist. Jake was an author. And as soon as he lost his father, completely changed career paths and just became a temporal physicist. And it did so because every few years, Ben Sisko would come back, and he was trying to figure out a way to keep him there. And in doing so, let his whole life get away from him. So Jake Sisko perhaps was not the one who time traveled, but it was Sisko. It was Ben. Ben was the one who was going forward in time and then back and then forward and then back again. And I just want to remark on that because he watched his son age. He watched his son grow old. He watched his son grow sick. And no parent should be able to do that while remaining the same age. So I wondered, because Tony, you're a dad now. What are your thoughts on...
it was heartbreaking because every time that Sisko came back and realized, every time that Benjamin came back, he realized that Jake was getting older, and he would ask Jake about his life. And so he would leave off from every last point that he could remember. And then when he realized that Jake didn't have much of a life because Jake was waiting after he became the physicist, trying to figure out how to bring his father back, it crushed him. Like, he was happy to see his son, but it crushed him knowing that his life had been taken away from him, so to speak. And as a parent, that's just like very, very heartbreaking to think that like their life is now dedicated trying to bring you back from somewhere that you've gone unwillingly. Right. But yeah, it's also heartwarming, the dedication of a father and son, because the time that Jake did have, that's why he wanted his father back. Like, there was already an investment in that relationship to where you're fighting that hard to bring someone you love back. There's a whole lot of black feels in it, and it's just great to see a positive relationship.
Yeah, for sure. And that line, Jake let me go. It's like, you're crying. Like, how could you not feel things? How can this individual
or a Vulcan or Commander S'Triton,
which is like some weird combination of the two. Imagine Sisko having lost his wife, got this commission on this raggedy behind station, becoming a deity, so to speak, in this alien religion. And now getting caught up in a temporal rift and watching his son age, grow old, and die. It's just the Chronicles of Benjamin Sisko. Like, I just can't get enough, and almost to the point where I can totally forgive.
Too much.
I can forgive his temporal incursions because they weren't on purpose. The visitor was not on purpose. Past tense was not on purpose. There was a little bit more interaction than probably should have been in past tense.
There were some intentions.
Right. But, none of those were on purpose until Trials and Tribulations. Now, I debated about including this because our COs slid this as one of the instances that we should include in our analysis. And I was a little, I didn't know how I felt about it because Sisko's interaction and Bashir's interaction with the past was pretty cut and dry, right? It was pretty straightforward, and also pretty.
They were fanboys in space,
right? And they were harmless as far as affecting the timeline. If anything, they enabled it to occur as it needed to. The reason why I bring up the reason why I bring up Trials and Tribulations, and probably why Talij put it in there in the first place, is because Worf's time travel is the one that is, I think, the most remarkable because of the sordid history of Klingon Federation relations. Right. The aesthetic part is the next part. So we already know that when the Defiant gets thrown back in time, and they have to deal with this. But hey, I said what I said. Paging Dr. Freud. Not only do they get thrown back in time, but they pretty much determine that, we have to make sure this course of events occurs so that we can be born. I'm sure that Worf knew right then and there that there was going to be a problem because Klingons in the 2200s didn't look like the way Worf did. So he beams onto the station. He covers his face, right? Covers the part of him that makes him who he is, which can be painful, especially for somebody like Worf who struggles with, his identity. Covers his face, goes back in time, sees that there are different Klingons, and Odo, Bashir, and O'Brien turn and look at him like, so you're going to explain why these people don't look like you, right? Which every marginalized person has had to deal with when you're in a group of people that are homogenous or at the very least not like yourself. And you have to be the spokesperson for your entire culture or ethnic group because they perceive an anomaly. Yeah, definitely. That face. For sure. Tell me all the things, which is a burden for any of us. And Commander Worf shouldn't have had to dealt with that. But I bring it up specifically because Klingons and Tribbles don't get along.
It's like having a bunch of rats in your house and you're telling everybody, I hate these. And they're like, oh my God, but they're so adorable. No, right. They're terrible. They're a plague.
Yeah. People fail to realize that Tribbles are pestilence, right? They're pests. They consume rates of food quicker than people can produce them. They reproduce at alarming rates. And the reason why they are as infectious as they are is because they're cute. Human beings and other species tend to find them aesthetically pleasing, so we're less inclined to kill them with fire. And that's what needs to happen with Tribbles. and I say that as someone who has several. Like, I keep a Tribble farm. It's cute. We don't feed them much, so they don't procreate as often. There's controlled, responsible Tribble keeping. But that wasn't happening on that space station. And Worf tried to tell them. Worf tried to tell them they are a plague. There's a problem. And Odo didn't want to listen. Probably. Well, yeah, but also Odo's a cop, and we don't want to talk about that. We don't want to talk about that. So Worf, that example is prevalent to me because listen to Black people, whether they're humans or Klingon or otherwise. Worf told you that these things were problematic and nobody wanted to listen to him. And now we have to not... Sorry?
I'm sorry. I was saying that's a recent theme. Black people told you.
Maybe you should listen sometimes. Maybe. Not saying that all Black folks are prolific at all times, but usually there's been a life experience that has given us some type of wisdom that you may not be able to share. So, in this case particularly, when the Klingon dude tells you to leave the tribbles alone, maybe leave the tribbles alone. Just a thought, you know? And this brings us to the big one, the meat and potatoes, the coup de grace. The coup de grace, and that is far beyond the stars. Now, when both S'Triton and Talij included this, I was a little confused because it's not an intentional time travel story. Would you agree to that, Tony?
No, I would wholeheartedly agree. That's primarily because. Oh, were you gonna tell him?
Go on, please.
Oh, okay. It's because Benny travels through time, and it's not Benjamin Sisko. So, in the beginning of the episode, Benjamin is talking to his father, who had come to visit for the first time in a long time, and he was stressed. He was going through a lot of things, and he saw an editor, a paper editor, outside his office, and he ran to the door and he asked everyone, "Did you just see that person?" And they were like, "What are you talking about?" And Benny is the person who happens to work with that editor, who is back in the 1950s when it is nearly impossible to do anything as a Black person in America. But Benny is a science fiction writer. He is a very wonderful science fiction writer, but he works in an office with one other Black person and everyone else is white. And it is one of those stories because he is traveling to the future. A sci-fi writer, he's seeing the future and writing about it. Now, to us, this is just our regular time, but to him, these are just hallucinations and dreams, right?
Yeah, but go ahead.
Go.
No, you go.
You go.
No, you go. You're doing so well.
Okay, very well. I shall continue. And so the thing about it is he will see Worf, who in his time is a very big baseball player, who understands that as a baseball player, he only matters when he's playing baseball, other than another Black boy. And to hear Benny be told that no one wants to read a Negro's stories because they're too fanciful and no one cares, not even taking the time to take it up with the actual owner of the paper. Am I correct about that part?
I mean, it's kind of debatable. The Odo character says he ran it by the owner, but who knows? Because gatekeeping.
Exactly. And you watch this man write a beautiful story about a starbase deep in space and the people that live there, and that it's run by a Black man. Sorry.
It's fine. You're passionate. It's one of the things about being human. Continue.
And he watches a murder on the street, and the police who are supposed to be there are supposed to protect and help, and they are berating and they are belittling and they are demeaning and they are crushing this man's spirit in front of us on screen, and there is nothing you can do about it. And it is so troubling because of the fact that you think about how many people say that they love Trump, right? And that people still need to do better.
Yeah, for sure. And to your point, Tony, it is Benny that time travels. We don't get an explanation as to why the two of them were linked, temporally speaking. That one's kind of just left for all of us to interpret. But you know, there can be theories, right? People have made very strong arguments about brain energy and brain patterns and how influential, how tangible that energy can actually be. Can it influence things around you? Are our intuitions as human beings, just are they a fallacy? Are they actual intuition, or is it an element of our brains that at your point in time you all aren't able to perceive, right? During the 21st century. Yeah. And I wonder if the duress that Benny experienced leading up to the events in Far Beyond the Stars, and perhaps afterwards, and certainly during, were so impactful to him, and so traumatic to him, that he projected that trauma beyond the confines of time and space, so that someone in the 24th century was not only able to perceive them, but arguably interact and coincide with some of these occurrences as well. So there's a group in Philadelphia that talks about Black quantum experiences, and how us remembering things from our past, remembering our own past, remembering stories that ancestors have told us and family members have told us, being a form of time travel, just in and of itself. That you don't need a machine, you don't need crystals from Boreth and build a ship to be able to experience the past. And when you think about it in those terms, certainly every memory that we relive is a form of time travel. Mm-hmm. So it stands to reason, is a little bit of a stretch, but it stands to reason that Benny being able to perceive, was Benny able to perceive that future because he conjured it, or was he able to perceive that future because his temporal resonance was so strong that Cisco was able to pick up on it? And I think that's the other heavy part about Far Beyond the Stars, because on surface level, it's an excellent explanation of systemic racism, right? But it's also a great example of deviceless time travel. And I really want to leave folks with that, so that they can go back and watch Far Beyond the Stars in a different way, because I know that episode is difficult for a lot of us to watch again for all the reasons. So if you are watching this and you are curious to rewatch Far Beyond the Stars, try thinking of it from a perspective that it's Benny's trauma that is enabling him to traverse space, time, and in this case, thought. Whew! God, I love talking about this kind of stuff. This is what we're here for. This is what we do this. This is why they plucked us. This is why they plucked our COs, and this is why they plucked us. Because it's fire. And talking about temporal projections, one could argue that Flashback from Voyager is a great example of that, except they don't actually go back in time. It was a memory engram. Yeah, it's a memory engram that and S'Triton can write me up for this later. I don't care. Fight me. Well, maybe not. Demote me. Whatever. Court-martial me. It's fine. I'll sit in the brig for a couple hours. I'm okay with that. But I would not consider. Yeah, I would not consider time Flashback rather to be a temporal incursion. However, Future's End is a great example of going back in time, not only as a person of color, but also as someone who was not human. Fortunately, we don't see too much racism towards Tuvok right away. A lot of the pushback for Tuvok is that he's odd, right? He's cold, he's calculating, he's a Vulcan, but they don't know that. They're just like, this dude's, what's wrong with him?
Weird.
Yeah, and but we don't see racism in that incursion until the second half of that episode, when Chakotay and B'Elanna go back to rescue Paris, Tom, and Janeway. Oh wait, am I thinking of the right one? Yeah, because it's just, wait a minute.
Isn't it the hillbillies at the end of the episode?
It's the one where they go back to 1996 and...
Yeah, Future's End Part 2. That's what you're talking about.
Okay, I get confused. The time streams kind of tile up on each other sometimes. But they witnessed a temporal incursion from someone in the 29th century. And they go back in time accidentally. Come to find out, this temporal incursion from the 29th century gives some hippie dude a leg up, technologically speaking, and it becomes the worst like crypto guy you can ever imagine. And it's Chakotay initially. Yeah, it's Chakotay, Janeway, Paris, and Tuvok. Oh, Paris and Tuvok got stuck. That's what it is. They got split up, and Paris and Tuvok got stranded. I was like, how did Chakotay come back to rescue him if he was down there too? No, they got split up. Janeway and Chakotay got back to the ship. And in a rescue attempt, Chakotay and B'Elanna went to go save them. Yeah, and B'Elanna had
the hillbillies.
Right.
Sorry.
Before we get to the hillbillies. No, you're right. Before we get to the hillbillies, B'Elanna had a cool moment as they were launching that search. She, poses the question, what happens if we're stuck here? Like, we'll have to get jobs. And Chakotay's like, I'd hire you in a minute. She's like, who's going to hire a Klingon? She's like, you might be. He was like, I would love to go back and get my anthropology degree and do all these fun things. She's like, look at my face. How am I assimilating into this society without causing a fuss? And that was an interesting point for her to launch. But when they get there and get stuck and get captured by some MAGA guys, right? They get captured by some I'm trying to find terms to describe these folks without being derogatory in some way, but the only thing I can think of is redneck, hillbilly, and good old boy. There you go. Thank you. That's a good way to put that. They run into them good old boys and get tied up, left in a shed. And we can tell because it was, you could tell they were, and at first I got instantly nervous because here's two brown people tied up at the mercy of someone who's probably related to their aunt in more than one way, right? So that's just alarming first and foremost. And just when we thought, I'm just saying, I'm probably not wrong. We could check the paperwork, but I thought they were going to avoid some of the racism until one of them good old boys calls Chakotay an Indian. And I was like, oh, here we go. So I was waiting for there to be more, indigenous slurs. I was waiting for there to be some Latinx slurs against B'Elanna. Fortunately, she was able to, I guess, avoid some of that because she got species discrimination instead. It had the potential to get really, really ugly there until they get rescued by the Doctor and Tuvok. And it was then that we seen a little bit more racism when one of the other good boys comes in and says, oh, there's somebody outside, some dude in pajamas and a black man. And I was like, yeah. The only reason why they didn't use a different term is because that was on 90s television and not real life. If we're going to peel back the veil for like a hot second, I'll put it back. But what that was coded as. You knew that was going to be a potentially dangerous, potentially fatal situation for all three of those people. And it just really highlights what type of environment people of color and members of the Cosmic African Diaspora have to deal with when looking at a concept like time travel. Now you're a big Tuvok fan. I know he was part of your thesis from the Academy. How do you feel his involvement in this particular incursion was remarkable, or do you think it was underwhelming? How do you feel about it?
I mean, it was a standard Tuvok shows up, does what needs to be done, and leaves. But I always love the cool, calm demeanor that members of the diaspora have, particularly, and especially when going back in time, because they already know the primitive mindset in which they're walking into, and they have to either keep their cool or they're going to screw up the time stream and make their jobs a lot harder than they need to be. And so just even having that, knowing that you're walking to a never-ending, constant parade of stupid and a whole lot of ugly, and still knowing that you are Starfleet's finest and exemplifying such,
That's why we put on the uniform every day.
That's why I love my job.
It's why we put on the uniform, because whether it's, this one or whichever one we choose, because we're time travelers, doesn't matter which uniform we wear. We can't show you our actual uniforms because that's giving away too much. So this is really for your benefit more so than for ours. But that's a great point, Commander Ray. I appreciate you for adding that, and I appreciate you so far for participating today despite your injury. I'm sorry we don't have a doc to wave a light over it.
I was so ready. I was like, I just need a dermal regenerate. They don't have dermal regenerate.
I know. You don't understand the paperwork it takes to come back like this. Like, it's just a lot. Whatever you have is with you, and if you don't have it, then it's just not here. If you would like to hear more from us as a member of your away team, please feel free to find all of our social media at Your Away Team. You can find us on Instagram, Twitter. Our links to our shows are there. We actually just dropped an introductory one in a couple, was it last night? I don't know, time is a river. To give you a better idea, because we know on the show that you've heard primarily from Commanders S'Triton and Talij, and we just wanted to let you know that we're here too. And we exist for you, and that we want to make sure that all of your time travel needs are properly cared for and that you do it responsibly. So as we say, any last thoughts, Tony, before we go, because we're running a little out of time. Mind your business.
I thought we were doing the thing.
We can do the thing. I just wanted to give you a chance to say if you want before we do the thing.
Oh no, I mean, thank you all for listening to us upon expound our knowledge about temporal investigation, Starfleet. As we expound, I mean, I'll take it. The eye patch might be here to stay, then jump through time with different patches. We'll see what we get. But no, we love doing this. We love talking about everything that goes on and how it affects the members of each crew. Some of them didn't have a counselor. No.
Yeah, unacceptable. Unacceptable. We need counselors.
Lord. Book some time on the holodeck. So, as we would normally say.
Yeah, for real.
Mind your business.
Stick together.
Let's do the thing. Mind your business.
But I did.
And boldly go.
Stick together.
What?
Boldly go. Thank you, Women at Warp and IDIC Podcast Fest, for doing such an amazing, amazing event. Thank you for letting us participate. Hopefully we will see all of you at one point or another in an upcoming time stream, coming to a time stream near you. Be sure to check us out on all the socials, and we hope to hear from you all soon. Thank you so much. Mind your business. Stick together.